We have major news concerning MSI and Worlds. I'm Ardo Cal alongside Emily Rand and Jacob Wolf. Emily, the floor is yours. Let's get started right away. Major news concerning the future. What's going to happen as it pertains to MSI and Worlds? Let's start with MSI. What's happening?
There will be no MSI, which I think we had chatted about this kind of as a possible a probability, not a possibility, a probability, right? We had already discussed this on the Rift Rewind that it was going to be very difficult to hold MSI in the current global pandemic. So I know they had been looking for other options. It was first supposed to be in Turkey, and then it was supposed to be in LA at the Forum, and then everything else hit. And I think after searching for some sort of method to have it, they've just kind of scrapped it so that basically in their press release, they stated that they wanted to make sure that every team can still finish their summer split on time. So now that all leagues are online, everyone's starting summer at the same time at their like scheduled time. They're ending at a good time for Worlds to happen without that MSI break, which was going to occur in July, having been moved forward into like midsummer split. And now they're focusing all of their attention on the League of Legends World Championship, which is still scheduled to be held in China at the end of the year.
Okay, so let's get some details on that. Let's get all the information out first, and then we'll give our opinions on everything. So MSI is canceled. What will Worlds look like?
So Worlds is basically they restructured a lot of the seating. Some of it was just necessary. Like for example, there's no more LMS. So since the LMS and the LST merged into the PCS, which is the Pacific Championship Series, both Southeast Asian, Taiwanese, Hong Kong, and Macau teams all in one. They have two seeds now. The Vietnamese Championship Series is now going to have two seeds as well, based on their performance. And the big news, so I'm like burying the lead here a bit, but the LPL and the LEC, so China and Europe, due to their past 2 years of results at the World Championship, are each being awarded 4 total seeds. So 4 teams from the LEC and the LPL will be at Worlds.
So that's big news. We'll dive into the opinion on that. Is there any information on the structure of Worlds? Are we looking at an all online format? Are we looking at a hopeful in-person format if the situation does arise, if things do get better? Is there any information there?
No, all they said was basically that they're refocusing all of their esports presentation efforts onto making sure that this is going to be still an incredible spectacle in China. Because if you remember, it's the 10-year anniversary, right? And they wanted to have this in China because it's the largest fan base in League of Legends. It's a traditional sport there. If people remember the 2017 Worlds Championship, that's when we had the giant like CGI dragon and it was held at the Bird's Nest. And if they have an audience, they can definitely fill like a major stadium, especially if a Chinese team is in the finals. So I think we don't know if we still don't know the details. We don't know the date yet either. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know if they might hold it maybe a little bit later as opposed to previous years. That's my speculation, just because there will likely still be some sort of quarantine periods depending on what country you're coming from, or even if you're traveling from city to city in China itself. So that's all speculation, but I think the big thing is that they still want to hold the actual event of Worlds in China, and they're really focusing efforts on that.
So Jacob, what do you think that will look like?
We'll see, right? We're playing with an interesting timetable here. We've heard several epidemiologists have concerns that there could be a second outbreak of the coronavirus, massive outbreak of the coronavirus in the fall or later throughout the year, that this could be something that happens in waves rather than happens just once and then goes away. Unless there is a shorter timetable on a vaccine to be able to prevent people from being infected. But vaccines usually take anywhere from a year to 18 months. We haven't really heard any significant cure process at this point. Some drugs here or there are fighting the virus, but they're not guaranteed to work. Clinical studies are still going on, and various different agencies around the world are still trying to figure this out together. So the Worlds is in the fall, indeed, in October traditionally, and spills a little bit into November. As of right now, it seems like the coronavirus is dampening down a lot in China. Things are slowly returning to normal across and again, to Emily's point, like, this is a giant continent, and I think or almost a continent in itself, right? It's the largest part of Asia, China is. And so when you look at this, right, like, it seems like things are moving in a positive direction, that maybe we can get there. My biggest concern, though, would be getting players into the country of China from elsewhere. Obviously, if the U.S. is still a hotbed come October, and other countries, Europe obviously has significant problems in certain countries also. Understandably so, the Chinese government would probably be hesitant to let some of these people into the country for fear of spread of the virus once again.
Okay.
So I think we're playing with a little bit of timetable. I don't think Riot really knows the answer to what it looks like yet because of COVID-19. I think that's why they've shared the limited amount of information about seeding that they have here after canceling MSI. But I think we don't know yet, and I think we're going to have to, I think we could have a conversation like this every 2 weeks and know something more about the coronavirus, just because things are just unraveling so quickly.
Yeah, certainly we could be in a situation in a month where things are starting to die down. A vaccine is found, whatever the case may be, and all of a sudden we're back to normal in 2 months. Or we could be in a situation like this for several months. We don't know. That obviously that uncertainty is still there. Let me ask this: with that uncertainty still there, the possibility does exist that we could remain in the same situation when Worlds is scheduled to happen. And so I wonder, Emily, can Worlds work online? Is that even an option being thought of, a backup plan per se, that Worlds happen completely online? Is that even feasible?
I mean, based on what they want to do, I think it'd be a serious, like, obviously, if they have to do it, they'll do it. Based on what they've been doing in China right now, for anyone that has watched the LPL broadcast, they know that casters have actually been going to the venue and casting from the venue. Most recently, I believe just this past week was the first week that we saw casters not casting with masks on. So I believe everyone is still wearing masks outside. However, when they're in the casting booth or the desk, they do not have to wear masks anymore. You've seen a lot of players traveling from, team houses to team houses. You've seen a lot more travel, I guess, within Shanghai. So even though a lot of social distancing methods are still in practice, because it has decreased so significantly in China, you still see people going out a bit more, and with everything starting to ease up. The big thing to me is our team's going to be able, so our foreign team's going to be able to travel to China is the first major point, right? Because I think regardless, even if they're having an online tournament, you need to make sure that everyone is in the same country. And if they're going to still have it in China, that does mean the teams from every other region but the LPL would have to travel to China and have some sort of boot camp set up in China, probably in Shanghai, since that's where the official LPL venue is. So that if you're still doing an online tournament, it doesn't actually mitigate the teams traveling to China. Like, you're not going to have a 200 ping extravaganza where people are logging in from Vietnam and South Korea and Berlin and all these other all the cities in Europe, from Seoul. That is not feasible. So you have to have teams traveling to China specifically, even if you have an online event. That's the thing.
China
that I
is the
stress.
country that's been identified, right? Like, China is the plan. There's no contingency at all in terms of a specific country for Worlds.
So as far as I know, we didn't know the individual cities. Jacob might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, except for Shanghai. I believe the finals, they said, were going to be held in Shanghai specifically. I mean, China is a massive country, even when you're considering that it's pretty much only like the eastern half where people travel. Even traveling out to like the furthest major cities is typically like, depending on your mode of transportation, like anywhere from 6 hours to 12 hours or whatever. So I mean, I think the big thing with that is I would assume that teams would just be going to Shanghai specifically because that is the city that has definitely been identified as a world's venue.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is a lot of people have talked about, because Riot like put out a roadmap for the next few years of League of Legends esports a while ago after the completion of this past Worlds, where they said that or actually after the completion after the completion of the China Worlds, I believe 2 years ago.
I think it was after South Korea, just because they had that late venue swap, remember, where we didn't know where one of the legs was going to be held in South Korea, if I remember correctly.
So they put out a roadmap that basically laid out what would be 2019 Worlds, what would be 2020 Worlds, and what would be 2021 Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And then for 2021, they did say that it would be North America, presumably the United States. And when everything first started in China, there was a lot of talk about, would they flip-flop it? Would we see them do 2020 in the US? Would they see 2021 be in China instead? And now China's not even the problem with the coronavirus, frankly. Like, China the cases are declining. Fewer cases are popping up. The number is going down of new cases every single day. We've had days where they've reported literally zero, and you can argue the information over that or not and whether you believe it. But nonetheless, like, the U.S. has a significant problem with the coronavirus, notably Los Angeles, where MSI was set to be held at the Forum. So now that's not even an option to me that you could flip-flop it and do it here. Like, there's no one place in the world. We see conversations of like the UFC looking to get like a private island or whatever and bring all the fighters to it. Like, I don't think that that's possible in this situation. Not when you're bringing in so many people.
Apparently, that was the rumor for that too.
But when you're bringing all of these places or all these people from all these places, right? Literally the entire it's Worlds is very akin to the Olympics, obviously, which we saw got delayed by a year also. In terms of, there are people from every single major country in the world: South Korea, the United States, Germany, China, Vietnam, right? Like, the list goes, Russia, like the list goes on, right? Like, there are teams coming from all sorts of major countries in this world that are dealing with the coronavirus very differently, in different ways, right? And so the probability of infection is varies, right, depending on where you're coming from. So I don't see the private island option being a thing, although I would find it kind of comical if Riot gave it a shot.
Fly all these gamers out to a private island. Let's go.
Exactly. But I do think that
can you imagine how many gamers would want to be on that island if it was safe to do so? You make a gamer island of a bunch of
literally all gamers. So
the best internet in the world. They just build a bunch of towers, make every tournament there.
And they would still stay inside. But nonetheless,
it could be a tropical island on a beach. They would still be inside playing games.
They're just like all hunched over there. Yeah.
Par for the course. So let's talk about. Go ahead. Sorry, Jacob.
I was just gonna say, like, I don't think there's a snap your fingers way to fix this, to make this any better for any party here. And again, like, we're waiting on forces that are way bigger than any of us, that are way bigger than Riot Games and Tencent, right? Like, this is a global pandemic that some of the biggest health organizations and governments in the world are trying to tackle, and they haven't figured it out yet. So it is very much something that is out of everyone's control, including Riot's.
So the big news, MSI has been canceled. Worlds will be continuing on. China is still the targeted country. That is where all the resources are going to be poured into. And they've made some seeding changes. Emily mentioned it earlier. The LPL and LEC receive 4 seeds. The LCK and LCS each still have 3. The PCS gets another seed for 2 total. The VCS gets a second seed as well. Emily, let's dive into that LCK receiving 3 seeds. because I know, and you mentioned this before we even went on the air, that this has been a point of contention for several years now. How many seeds should the LCK get? And you mentioned on this broadcast that it seems like the last 2 years was more heavily considered in terms of how many seeds were awarded by region. So how do you think South Korea will react to this news?
Well, I mean, I think that makes sense. Like, so the last part of your sentence makes sense, right? Because I do think, unfortunately, since we have so few international tournaments, you do have to go off of results-based analysis at previous World Championships and the midseason invitational. We are not having the midseason invitational. Therefore, we are looking at seeding from the past two World Championships and last year's MSI. And that means that a Chinese team and a European team have been the finalists for the past 2 years in G2 FPX, with FPX winning, and the previous year with Fnatic and Invictus Gaming winning. So I don't mind that they're basing it on the past 2 years. I was just thinking that in the very beginning of World's history,
Mm-hmm.
arguably from 2012 when Azubu Frost made it to finals. But you could also hard start in 2013 all the way to 2017. South Korea absolutely obliterated everyone. South Korean teams were at the top of almost every single international event. They only lost the 2000, like in terms of major international competitions, the 2015 MSI SKT lost to Edward Gaming is the only like standout in that time period where a South Korean team did not win a major international event. And no, I'm not counting IAM. I'm sorry, Flash Wolves. But I think if I'm a South Korean fan, I'm kind of looking at this and I'm like, we were so good for so long. Everyone in the world was always like begging Riot to give South Korea more seeds. So even though it's like retroactive, I'd still be a little like sad. Maybe it's just because I am a 2013 KT Rolster Bullets fan. They didn't get to go to Worlds, and I'm still bitter about it. I'll admit that, like front up. That's my bias.
Okay, so Jacob, I look at this and I see the PCS gets another seed, the VCS gets a second seed. I'm not taking away anything from the non-major four regions, but everything Emily just said makes perfect sense. And who's going to complain if a fourth LCK team were to go to Worlds? Who would even think that would be out of place? So, why do you think that the decisions were made to give more slots to non-major four regions, in particular the LCK, as opposed to just giving them a fourth spot?
Well, I'll clear that up really quickly because I know Jacob has a point, but it's they're not taking up anyone else's spot for the PCS. It's
No, I
basically
mean
just
they weren't awarded a
reslotting.
fourth spot, right? Like what I'm saying
Well,
is they
the
don't have four
PCS wasn't,
spots.
but it's not like those seeds are taking away from a major region, is my point. Like they're not taking a seed away from a major region by existing.
No, I get that. I'm saying at the end of the day, the LCK doesn't have four spots, and these other regions have more spots available given to them, right? So why not take one of those spots to give to the LCK? Who would complain about that?
So I think there's a resounding feeling across all of Riot right now, and look no further than the LCK franchising news. Literally go read that announcement that the LCK is a farm region. And I want to say that as someone who has been around this industry for a long time, has watched the LCK raise those trophies many, many times over Samsung twice and SK Telecom a number of times, right? But there's a resounding feeling, I think, right now in the powers that be in the League of Legends esports community that the LCK is where players get a nice start, they have a good performance season, and then they get a fat check to go to Europe, North America, or China. And part of the reason franchising's happening in LCK is to fix that, right? Is because they want the Comcast Spectacors, who are now co-owners of T1 of the Worlds in their league. They want the Gen Gs of the league, right? These successful mobile app developers who sold their company and then started Gen G, right? They want those types of people in their league. So the fat check comes from a Korean-based company, not a Chinese-based company or a Los Angeles-based company for these players. So as of right now, it does feel like there's sort of, I don't want to say like discrimination against the LCK as a region, but nonetheless, I do think that there is this feeling right now that the LCK is not necessarily in a good spot globally, and that it's a result of years of other regions mining its talent, and that they want franchising to fix it, that they don't have a solution, and that the reason LCK has not remained dominant since that final win for Samsung several years ago is because all of its talent is leaving. And so you can make a different argument for the LCS. The LCS, obviously a major region in its own, but not the most competitive. Hasn't been the most competitive for literally almost a decade. Thank you very much.
It's hilarious to me that the LCS is getting 3 seeds alongside the LCK. I feel like that adds insult to injury.
So why not, for example, why not take one spot away from the LCS and give it to the LCK? Who's complaining other than LCS fans?
LCS owners.
LCS owners would care. So it's a money thing.
I mean, I think so. I think it's these big I think they have 3 slots for different reasons. I think the LCK has 3 slots because they deserve at least 3, right? Maybe you can make that argument for 4 or not. I think LCS would pitch a living fit if they were subtracted any amount despite performance. Performance of the LCS is pretty pathetic, to be honest, on the international stage. We have not seen many of them do
we never
very
talk
well
about
over
that
the
here at
years.
ESPN Esports. No.
But look, I'm not just hating North American players. I think Emily and I have talked in depth both privately and publicly about like how you fix this, right? In terms of talent development and like building things up and the way that practice goes and sort of the mentality that exists there in Los Angeles and many of those gaming houses, right? I think though, like, you have some of the richest men in the world in the LCS, right? Like these people they like move mountains and can and have connections that Riot will need to tap into and has tapped into many, many times over since the LCS franchise. So you can't take away from the LCS because those people will pitch fits. You can't, you can't take away from one of the smaller regions because like the VCS is a good example of this. They have performed pretty above average, right? For a minor region when it comes to international tournaments.
That's why they're getting the 2nd seed.
Yeah, exactly. Like you look at Gigabyte Marines memorably at MSI a couple of years ago, right? Like there are reasons for the other seeding. I guess you could make the argument that they just add 2 seeds to Worlds overall. Like you just throw 2 more on the pot and give one to LCK and you give one to LCS. But the LCS isn't deserving of a 4th, in my opinion.
But LCK is deserving of a 4th, in my opinion.
I mean,
like I like that idea, Jacob. I think that's a solution.
Yeah, I think and this is the other problem with results-based analysis, because I feel like LEC fans are going to get mad at me for saying this. I feel like the top 2, maybe you could argue for 3, but definitely the top 2 in G2 and Fnatic are indubitably world-class teams, right? Whereas LCK, I think, suffers from this thing where they have a bunch of like pretty good teams. So their depth from like 1 to 4, I would argue, is stronger than the LECs, but the LEC has 2 teams that are better, if that makes sense. And that's when you look at how this results-based analysis is working, because it doesn't necessarily always account for the depth of the region. What is that 4th seed going to look like? Arguably, I think China is actually in the best spot for this, right? Because the LPL at the top is very rich. It's very diverse.